Simple JavaScript slideshow demonstrating basic DOM manipulation and event handling. We've done a lot of the basics, and you've learned a lot about how JavaScript works and how you can manipulate the DOM and capture events. So now it's time to put together some scripts that are actually doing some interesting things and will allow us to test out what we know so far. If you look in the start files for this project, you'll notice there's some images and an index.html file. And if you open up that index.html file in your code editor, you'll see that it's just got some very basic markup inside of it that includes a div with an image, one of the images in the folder, and a paragraph with two links, one for a previous link and one for a next link. And over here in my browser, I can see that it looks like this. When the user clicks the next link, it'll bring up the next picture. And when they click the previous link, it'll bring up the previous picture. And that's what we're going to make in this particular exercise here. There are lots of ways of going about creating this simple slideshow. But one way of doing it is to make a variable that includes an array, and a variable which is an array, and it includes all of the images that we have in the folder. So let's start right there with that, because that's a really nice, simple place to start. And then what we're going to do is when the user clicks the link for next or previous, we're going to swap out the source attribute. We're going to swap out the value of the source attribute with the value from this array. So if we're getting if we'll start with getting image 0, which is image1.jpg, number 0 in the array. And then when you click next, we'll get image 1, which is this one here, which is actually image 2. So it's a little bit confusing because these are labeled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but they're actually in the array 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. But let's start by putting in the array into our script over here. So down here at the bottom of the page, just add script tags, like so. Script tags. And in the script tag, we're going to add an array, var y images equals square brackets. And then each element goes inside quotes. It doesn't matter if they're single quotes or double quotes. It doesn't really matter. You can do it either way. Image1.jpg, comma, image2.jpg, and so on. We can actually put a comma here and just copy and paste. That's going to be image 3. And then we've got image 4. And finally, image 5. And the last one will not have a comma. It's important you take out that final comma. Image 5, and then a semicolon. That's our array. So there's our array, and that's going to go and get these images. And they're all in here in the folder. If we had a folder over here called images, you would just add that here. You could add images / and add the folder name in there. But we actually, in this case, with the files I gave you, I didn't create a folder for them. So they're just sitting here kind of at the root level of this folder. So that's great. We're all set with our array of images that describes all of the images that we have here. And next, we'll start working on how to actually capture the event of clicking the next button and then handling the swapping of the source attribute. You will need some sort of variable that we can adjust along the way to capture which image that we're actually on in this array. So I'm going to make a variable called current image, and I'm going to set it to 0 because when the page loads, this image is showing, which is number 0 in the array. So images square bracket 0 would get that image. So let's set that over here. Let's make a variable here. Var current image and set that to a value of 0 to start with. So there we go. So that will help us with that. And then from there, we need to create an event handler that will handle the clicking for the next button. We'll do the next link first. This is what it'll look like. Document get element by ID next. So it's going to go into our document and find that link that has the ID set to next. And I'm using the onClick special event property. And I'm going to run a function called nextPhoto. Notice it doesn't have parentheses at the end of it, but I'm going to assign it a function called nextPhoto. So then I can create that function nextPhoto. So let's go ahead and add this to our script. Document get element by ID. Make sure it's always a good idea to pick it from the list so you don't spell it wrong. You have to get the capitalization right. Next. So that's going to go in here and look for this link here that has the ID of next. It's going to go into our document, look for that. OnClick equals next photo semicolon. And then down here, we're going to make a function called nextPhoto, like so. There we go. Notice that if we look at this image tag here, it has an ID called that has a value set to my image. So that's what we want to get, and we want to change the source attribute on that image if this button has been clicked. Also, what we want to do is we want to take current image here and increment it. So I'm going to do that first. I'm going to say current image plus plus. And remember, that's the same as saying current image equals current image plus 1. Doing current image plus plus is just a shortcut for taking current image, adding 1 to it, and assigning it back. Current image plus plus. So that's just a shortcut. Okay, great. So now I'm going to say, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to say, okay, I need to go document dot get element by ID. What ID do I want? I want my image up here. My image. And I want to set its dot source, src, equal to my images, that array, current image. So that will go into this array here and find current image. Now, the first time I click that link, current image is going to get incremented to 1. So it'll come in here, that's 0, this is 1. So it says, okay, that's image2.jpg. So this is going to be image2.jpg, and I'm assigning that to this source attribute up here, this source. So instead of saying image1.jpg, it's going to say image2.jpg. Let's save that and see if that works. Come over here, refresh. If I click next, you can see that it's changed. And if I do inspect down here, let me arrange this the way I want it. I'm going to put this down at the bottom. I'm going to turn off that button there. But if I come in here and look at this div, notice the source says image2.jpg. If I click next again, notice that got changed to image3. Image 4. image 5. Oops, what happened? We got to image 5 because there are 5 images, and then I clicked next again, and now I have undefined. And you'll notice there's an error over here as well. So I can go to my console log and see undefined, error, file not found. So it could not find, I've gotten beyond the end of my array. So at a certain point, it ceases to work, depending on how many pictures are in the array. So that's what we're going to fix next. Let's think about this for a minute. What we want to do is we need some code that says, if you're at the end of the array, go back to the beginning. Think about that for a minute. What do we know about JavaScript that will allow us to do this kind of thing? What logical flow control structure can we use to handle this? If you were thinking of something like this, you're on the right track. So if current image is greater than 4, because remember, the numbers in the array are 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if it gets greater than 4, if it becomes greater than 4, we can set current image back to 0, and then go and get the next image. So with this if statement in place, you can make the slideshow effectively loop around. So let's go ahead and add this. And it's just going to go in here, if, parentheses, curly braces. So in the parentheses, we want to say if current image is greater than 4. And it's kind of nice if you put some extra spaces in here, although not really necessary. If it's greater than 4, then the value of current image is going to get set back to 0. Current image equals 0. And we can just do this on one line. Sometimes you're likely to see it more like this, but like that perhaps. But this is such a short one statement selection, if statement, that it kind of makes sense to just keep it on one line there. If current image is greater than 4, we can set that back to 0. Let's test that. I come over here and refresh this, and I click next, and down here in the elements, I'm going to come down and see in my div, you can see that that's image 2, next 3, next 4, 5, and then if I click next again, it should get set back to 0, which would get us image 1. And that works. So now the next button is looping around through all of the images that we have. That's great. Now it would be a little bit better if we could generalize our script a little bit. So rather than greater than 4 here, I know that it's 4 because I know it's 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. I can use my length property to get that. I could do is less than myimages.length. That's not quite right yet because the length is 5. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 5 images in here. That's the length, right? So, but the images are numbered 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And we know that we want it to be 4. So it's myimages.length minus 1. And that may feel a little strange at first, but we'll be using this a lot when we're working with arrays. When we're working with arrays. The length of the array minus 1 is often what we want because arrays start counting at 0. 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. So myimages.length minus 1 will give us a 4. And it's generalized so that if I were to add more pictures in here and add more pictures into the array, then the script would continue to function without having to go in and adjust the script as well. And wherever in programming we can do that to make it so that there are fewer adjustments in the future. If you change things, the better. That will make your script more general. So let's just test this just to be sure it still works. And sure enough, the page loads, and we've got in our body here, in our div, we've got image 1 here, and I can click next. I can click next all the way through, and it'll wrap around to the first one just fine. So that's great. Okay, next thing we need to do is handle the previous button. And maybe you can do that for yourself. It's always a great challenge. It's not that different than what we just did. It's a little bit different, but it's not that different. So you might be able to do the previous button by yourself. To get started with the button for getting the previous photo, we first need an event handler that will go in and find that element with the ID of previous and add the onClick event property and run a function called previous photo. And then we can set up that function. So let's do that first. So up here, and you could even copy and paste this if you wanted to. Sometimes it's best to do that just to avoid making mistakes, but you have to be sure to change everything you need to change. So instead of next, this is previous. Instead of next photo is going to be previous photo. Okay, so now we've got our event handler, and now we need a function. Again, copy and paste, always good to make sure that the names match. Function, previous photo, parentheses, curly braces. There we go. Now, the way to think about this, the previous photo button, you have to think backwards. And the easiest way to do it is to think about what happens if you're on the last photo. Suppose we're showing on the screen image 5, and current image is currently set to 4. What do we want to have happen when we click the button previous photo? We want current image to decrement. We want it to go from 4 to 3, and then we want to go in and get this image. And then when we click it again, it goes from 3 to 2, and we get that image. And then it goes from 2 to 1, and we get that image. And then it goes from 1 to 0, and we get that image. So 0 is okay. If you click it again, if we don't do some sort of if statement, it's going to go from 0 to -1, and that's not going to work. So if the value of current image is less than 0, if it's less than 0, we want to set it to what? Well, we could set it to 4. That would work. Or we could set it to image, myimages.length -1, right? Let's take this piece by piece. Let's do this part first. I'm going to decrement current image. Current image. Oops. Minus. That will decrement it. That's the same as saying current image equals current image -1. So we're going to decrement current image. And then we can do this again. If we leave off the if statement altogether, you'll see when we get down to the bottom of the images, we're going to have an error. But let's just do it just to see how that happens and what that looks like. So over here, I can refresh this, and I'm going to click next until I get to the end, to the fifth photo here. Oops. Div. So I'm on 4. One more. So now I'm on 5. And now I can click previous, and it'll go to 4. It'll go to 3. It'll go to 2. It'll go to 1. And now if I click it again, it's going to have an error because current image is going to be -1. And that's not going to work. Okay, undefined. So that's where we need our if statement. So let's come back here and see if we can write that if statement. It's going to look like this, so I might as well copy this one. and paste it in here. But instead of current image is greater than my images, what I'm really looking for is current image less than, is it less than 0? Is current image less than 0? And if it is, I could set current image to 4, and that would work because that puts it back at the end of the array. That'll work just fine. But even better is to use the myimages.length -1. Again, to keep the script generalized. myimages.length -1. So now you'll see if I do this, I'm going to come back here, refresh the page, and again, I'll go back up to the end of the list here. There's 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, now if I click previous, it should go to 4, and then to 3, and then to 2, and then to 1. And now if I click it again, current image is now going to be -1. That's less than 0. That's going to kick off that if statement and say, all right, it's less than 0. So it's going to set it to the end of the array. And there it is. There's 5 again. Because current image is 4, which is getting image 5 from the array. So now I can loop through in either direction. I can loop through going frontwards, and I can loop through going backwards. Everything is working. So now all we need to do is clean up the script just a little bit, make it a little bit better. And one way of doing that is to put it in a separate script file. For this script, it's short enough. You could leave it at the bottom of the page if you wanted to. But just to practice our best practices, let's move this script into a linked file. So over here, I could make a new file and call it script.js. And on this file, I could put my function expression that will be immediately invoked. So we do that with parentheses. And then in the parentheses, we put in function with its parentheses and its curly braces, and then one more set of parentheses and a semicolon. Terrible syntax, but this will run when the script runs, when the script loads. It's an immediately invoked function expression. And it will keep us from having any variables in the global scope, which is always to our benefit. Because if you wanted to include this script on a web page with other things, perhaps you've got other things going on the web page, perhaps you've got other JavaScript elements going on the web page, you don't want current image to conflict with some other current image variable for some other script. So we want to keep everything inside of this function. So I'm going to click between here, and I'm going to also add my use strict directive. And then in here, I can just paste my entire script from here. And there it is. Shift-Tab to move that back. And even better would be to replace these variables with const. They're not going to change. Well, actually, this one can't be const current image. That one's going to change. That one needs to be let, because current image is going to get reassigned as we go through our scripts down here. But these variables will now be local to this function, and they won't be available at the global scope. So that kind of keeps everything nice and tidy in the script here. All right, over here, I'm going to remove that stuff and instead up here just link src equals script.js. Even pops up there in my menu. And I still need this closing tag, but I can move it up there. And that should work just as well. We should go back and test it and make sure that we didn't make any mistakes in the process of moving stuff around. And you can see that it still works just exactly the same as before. Now we could leave the script here at the bottom of the page. There's nothing wrong with that. And frequently I leave my scripts there. But even better is to move it up into the head of the page and add a defer attribute here. That will make the script load after the rest of the page is loaded. And it keeps it out of the body of my HTML, which I really want to keep my HTML as clean as possible so it's easy to read, easy to understand, easy to update, easy for Google to crawl, all of those reasons. I want to keep my HTML as clean as I possibly can without any extra attributes, without any extra code or anything else. But once I've got that all in there and working well, I should always come back and just test and make sure I did it right. Next, previous, and that's working just fine. So with that, we have a really nice script that's all set up and working well. And in this lesson, we've combined a lot of the basics that you've learned in the course. We're using some control structures, such as the sequence and the selection. We don't have a loop in this one, but we're using sequence and selection. We're using the custom functions. We've got event listeners. When those event listeners trigger, we're affecting the DOM to change the web page. So all of these things are going on. Now, what you could do to make this script even better, perhaps, or just to test what you know so far, is go back to the script. And how could you replace using the onClick event handler with using the add event handler method instead? And I recommend giving that a try because that's a really good challenge to see if you can figure out something on your own without making it too hard, without going too far. So see if you can do that because that will really be to your advantage. Okay, great. Great job putting this together, and we'll see you in the next lesson.